Hey guys, Stealth here. Today for the notable units we are looking at West Germany. What kind of units does West Germany have to offer and are they notable at all? Well, as you can see I have found some notable units, so let's get into it. First off, in Logistics tab we got the Command Panzer Leopard 2. This Leopard 2 is pretty heavily armored for a command vehicle. 15 points of frontal armor, 6 side, 4 back and 3 top. Now, normally I don't use command tanks. If you've watched several of my playthroughs, you know that I have never used one of these, or at least I've never showed you using one of these. But they are interesting because if you're fighting in a heavily contested area, these guys can be brought in to make sure that you actually hold that area. Or if you're trying to neutralize an enemy spawn region, you can bring in one of these guys, park it in the back of that zone. So on your more or less safe end of the area, and make sure that the spawn point is neutralized. Now other than that, they are not that notable. If you watched my American or my US notable units video, you know that they can do pretty much the same as a Command Abrams. They're just very heavily armored command vehicles. Now the fact that they do have a gun, that L44, doesn't mean you have to use this gun, because giving or firing your weapon will mean that the unit gives itself away. And a 230 point unit is of course quite the nice snack for an ATGM plane or any other ATGM unit that can take this unit down. So make sure you don't expose it to fire too much. If you want to kill one of these, like I mentioned, it's a tank. It has decent frontal armor but not the best, and most medium to high-end tank guns will quite easily slice through this 15-point frontal armor. So you can use it if you're playing the West Germany or NATO decks, but be careful because they're not that heavily armored. Another unit which is slightly notable is the Mankadi 6x6. This is a notable transport for me because most supply trucks only drive at 50 to 70 kph. This one is up to 90 kph and it ranks right up there with some of the fastest transports like the Hammet. It carries 1700 liters of supplies, which for me is a better point than the Hammet, which carries about 2400 if I do it by head. So this thing does transport quite a bit of supplies. Killing it is just too easy though. It does have a high strength. It's not as weak as this 5-point strength truck, but still it is unarmored, so anything can take out this unit. Moving on quickly to infantry, because this is where stuff actually gets interesting. Some of my favorite units in the game are the Fallschirmjäger 90. These guys are pretty much the commandos for the Germans, and that's the West Germans of course. They got the H&K G11 assault rifle, a very accurate assault rifle, and they can interestingly fire this thing as accurate when they're moving as when they're sitting still. So they both get that 60% accuracy, which is very nice, because it means that if you're doing in-town fighting, you can use these guys running from block to block and still have a lot of accuracy and a lot of firepower from that assault rifle. Not only that, but they also carry the LMG-3, the Light Machine Gun 3, and this one has the CQC tag. Now the LMG-3 is revered as one of the best machine guns in the game. They do a ton of damage, they have a very high rate of fire, and they have a 40% accuracy. They come with the CQC tag, so if you want to, you can use these in close quarter combat, meaning in the same block. Now, as if that's not good enough, they also carry the PZF-3, probably the Panzerfaust 3. Carries a rocket which flies up to 875 meters, which is a nice range for an RPG, 70% accuracy and 22 AP power. The best use I've found for these guys is to go in early into a town, pretty much like the SAS from the British, except that these guys don't have any AA. Capture a town quickly, wait for the Panzergrenadiers to come in, their mortars for example, or your riflemen of course. And then once they are there, you bring these guys back out into their helicopter and use them as operators behind enemy lines. They can take out a lot of very heavily armored stuff, so you don't have to limit yourself to hunting down AA and command vehicles or artillery with these guys, because 22 AP power will mean they do a lot of damage. The one weakness or semi-weakness that they have if you're using them behind enemy lines is that they don't have very good optics. They only carry medium optics, which is better than most. Of course, all infantry has medium optics except for recon infantry. But otherwise, these things are very, very good troops. Now to counter them, they're infantry. That means mortars, napalm, HE weapons, HE bombs, anything that flies will work because they don't have a good range against helicopters. 525 on the assault rifle and 595 on the machine gun. So taking down the Fallschirmjäger should not be too difficult. Just make sure you don't get too close to them with a tank, because at 875 meters they will take it out. Now, we got the Panzergrenadiers 90. These guys are the shock troopers for the West German army, and they do this job very, very well. They have a good assault rifle, the H&K G3A2. They also carry the light machine gun, which we just discussed from the Fallschirmjäger, so they got the same weapon, same accuracy, and the same rate of fire, and of course the CQC tag. So you can actually use this thing in block-to-block fighting exactly the same way that the Fallschirmjäger do. They also carry the Panzerfaust, but a little less rounds of those, and the assault rifle is a little worse, because this H&K G11 has a stabilizer and this one barely has one. Still, you get these guys for 20 points versus the 35 points from the Fallschirmjäger, and that makes them still a very, very capable fighting force. To kill these guys, same operating method as killing the Fallschirmjäger. Use anything that flies, use a bomb, use artillery, use mortars, use napalm. If you use any of those weapon systems, you're going to easily deal with Panzergrenadiers. Now, Panzergrenadiers are not only interesting because of the unit themselves, because of the weaponry they carry, but also the transports they come in. This is the Marder 1 line up to the Marder 2. And the Marder 2 is the unit I wanted to discuss because for me this is a very notable unit. The Mortar 2 has 10 frontal armor, and that means that it has some of the highest armor for an IFV in the game. I've seen tanks which have less armor than this, and that means that these guys can go one-on-one with tanks, especially since they have 6 AP power. And that means that at a 1925 meter range they don't exactly do this 6 AP power yet, but if you get closer, say 1200 meter range or closer, you're going to be really, really lethal against heavier tanks. These IFVs also carry medium optics, travel at a good speed of 65 kph and have a stabilizer, so you can use these after they dropped off their Panzergrenadiers in the town to support your tanks in your main push. Now to kill these guys you need to be clever. They do not work that well against helicopters because their range is 1575, so an ATGM will quickly kill this unit. And that ATGM can be fired from a tank, it can be fired from a helicopter, a plane or infantry. You might though need 1 or 2, maybe 2 ATGMs depending on the AP power of the ATGM itself. Because this thing has 10 frontal armor and 10 strength, so it will take some hits before it goes down. And that is if you take it from the front side. Of course, if you attack it from the sides, you're going to have a much easier time because that thing is less armored. A helicopter, as I mentioned, should engage this thing with an autocannon, but keep in mind that it has a 1575 meter range on this autocannon against helicopters. So that means that this thing will take down your helicopter if you get too close to it. Moving on to support tab. In the support section we got the Mars, and this MLRS, contrary to the ones firing HE, I do find interesting, because it fires these cluster weapons. And that means that they fire 6 AP power cluster munitions, which can do quite a bit of damage if you're facing an armored push. These guys can take down quite a bit of lighter vehicles and even some tanks, because they attack right from above. And that means that this 6 AP power is usually more than enough to heavily damage or just outright destroy those tanks. Keep in mind though that they do have a minimum range. You cannot fire them at anything less than, I believe, 8,000 meters. So they are not a direct contact weapon. You need to be at range for these guys to fire. Also, to resupply these guys you need to be patient because it takes quite a while and you need to have quite a bit of supplies on hand, so keep them close to a fob. Unit wise, it's very easy to kill. It is a mortar, sorry, it's an arty piece, and that means that it only has one frontal armor and nothing on the sides. It cannot run very quickly if it gets spotted. It has bad optics. So you really keep this thing at the back of your lines, and if you want to return fire at it, use artillery. Use one of your own commando teams which operate behind the enemy lines and might be able to get to this Mars. Or use a recon team and try to fly in the sides from a plane. It's very easy to take these guys down because they are such weak units. Another interesting unit, or unit line really, that the Germans have is the Leopard line. Whether you take the basic Flak Panzer Leopard or the Flak Panzer Leopard A2. Because all of these have very good accuracy for a SPAG. Most of these have 45% accuracy, going up to 60% accuracy and even 65% with a 55% stabilizer. Now that is also one of the main differences between the A2 and the standard Leopard. This one doesn't have a stabilizer. It has to be stationary before you can fire that gun. But they do carry quite a bit of ammunition, so you can keep it firing for quite a while. The Flak Panzer Leopard A2 for me is interesting because if it turns off its radar, it is still an effective AA weapon, and the only other units that can do that are units like the Tunguska. Provided they don't have a great range against helicopters anymore or airplanes, only 2275 or 1820, but the accuracy is good, HE power is decent, and even when moving these weapons can be fired. To counter these guys, if they have their main gun active, you can just use a seaplane. They can take those out at, depending on the seaplane, 3.5 to 4.8 kilometer range. And that means that you can safely engage this guy. They're also not that heavily armored, 3, 2, 2 and 1. That means that if you get close enough with a tank, they can wipe this out in one shot. Maybe if you have a lower caliber tank gun you need 2 rounds, but other than that they are not that good at putting up a fight when doing one-on-ones with tanks. Don't do one-on-one with infantry, because if this twin KDA can fire or this twin GDF can fire, they will really slice the infantry in half, and that is something you don't want to see. Next up, the FRR Roland 2. And for me this is a notable unit because unlike the Roland 3, the FRP Roland 3 and the Roland 2, these are not armored, but they're very quick. 80 kph, a decent mobile AA system for only 50 points. You get 5 at the hardened veteran C or 7 at trained. They have very good air detection, and if you're doing a motorized deck, these guys can really catch up or keep up with your main push, which is something that these FRP Roland 3s and 2s don't always do that well. Countering them though is sometimes a bit too easy if you don't micromanage these things well, because they don't have any armor. They are radar guided, so again a seaplane can make short work of these. They don't have any ground range, of course it's an AA weapon. So an infantry unit, a tank, an ATGM, anything that you like to use that is moving on the ground can take these guys out. Just try not to engage them with an airplane other than a seed craft or a helicopter. And the only exception for the helicopter would be the Russian Recon Ka-52, which actually fires seed missiles itself. Moving on to tanks, let's start off with the Leopard 2A5, one of the best tanks in the game. Very angled nose, as you can see, angled turret here, and you can see that reflected in 22 frontal armor. Now, not only that, but also a 70% accuracy, 65% stabilizer and 23 AP power gun means that this thing hits very hard. You don't get that many of them, 2 at trained or 1 at veteran, and that means that you have to be quite careful with these. You do need to micromanage them and don't send them out to the front on their own. They're not meant to do that. They are meant to be surrounded by a battle group. So make sure you have a couple of other tanks which can actually keep this unit safe. Make sure you have enough recon for these to make sure that the main gun can fire accurately at important targets. And make sure that you have enough cover or that you can pull up a smoke screen to get this guy to safety if he's hurt. because you do want to repair these guys. You don't want to wait to the last block of health till you retreat them, because that is usually the point where some unexpected unit leaps out of the bushes at this Leopard 2A5 and takes you for 170 points. To counter these things, you're going to have to work together with a couple of units because they are very heavily armored. Both on the front and the side, they have 9 frontal armor. Sorry, 9 side armor. And to counter these, you'll need at least 2 ATGMs, because they're going to have to first work through that 22 frontal armor and then do their actual damage. So you're going to need a couple of ATGMs or a couple of tanks which engage the tank from multiple sides. If you have a couple of tanks shooting at it from the main side, from the front side, and then a couple of firing into the sides of the tank, then you should be able to take this thing down pretty quickly. Also, an ATGM plane, an Su-25 for example, which can fire multiple ATGMs, will deal with this thing quite effectively. Infantry could be used, but you're going to have to be careful, because that main gun does hit very hard, even against infantry. So if you're engaging them, if it is at close range, do that using an RPG, like the Vampire from the VDVs. And if you do it like that, you can quickly take down the Leopard 2A5 without exposing your infantry too much. An excellent escort for the Leopard 2A5 is the KPZ-70 Kyler, and this is a notable unit because as some of the few units in the nations that have them available, these things carry autocannons, and this will really help if you're trimming down infantry. They can fire on the move, although not that accurate, but the stabilizer is actually as good as the main accuracy, so whether you use these things sitting still or moving, it doesn't matter. They will still hit quite a bit of infantry because they have a high rate of fire, and if you use these things for only 70 points, you have a decent AP power gun, you have a good autocannon to kill infantry, and you get a lot of armor from the sides, from the front, 12 frontal armor. And with this you have a good all-rounder tank for only 70 points. The best application for this tank is to escort the Leopard 2A5, like I said, or to hold down choke points where you can expect some infantry to show up. Just make sure that they don't get too close to the infantry. Keep them at that 1575 meter range, otherwise the infantry will wipe them out. Also, 12 frontal armor will protect you against some tank shells, but not too many. So if you face one of these Kylers, you just bring a heavier tank gun or a couple of ATGMs, fire them at long range, and you wipe out the Kyler and gain yourself 70 points. An interesting point about the Kyler is that they have medium optics, so they can actually spot for themselves if they have to, but try not to rely on this because it is not going to spot everything, and the most important targets or the most important threats are probably not going to get spotted. So you will need to bring a recon unit to escort this Kyler. Other than that, German tanks, especially the Leopard 1 line, relies mostly on speed. They are very quick tanks, carrying a good stabilizer, but they don't have the best armor. If you want armor in German tanks, you bring the Leopard 2 line. They also have a good stabilizer, and especially Leopard 2s, 2A1s, 2A4s, the whole line I would really endorse because they are very good tanks. They can take punishment, 19 frontal armor, and they can dish it out, both sitting still and on the move, and I've never really had a complaint about these tanks when using them. Moving on to recon. Let's start off with the PAH-2 Tiger. This helicopter is a good all-rounder recon helicopter because unlike the standard recon helicopter, this thing will cost you 3 times the price tag, but you get 3 times the weaponry. They get a Stinger, AA, they get some rocket pods, and they get the Hot 2 semi-active, so keep that in mind, ATGM, which means that they can engage pretty much all the forces that they encounter. The one thing that they lack, of course, is an autocannon, so once you run out of these weapons, this thing will not fire anymore. But they do have exceptional optics, they do travel at 290 kph, and that makes them a very nice escort for a battle group, because they can engage so many different targets. Air units, rocket pods for infantry and IFVs, APCs even, and Hot 2s with 25 AP power and 55% accuracy if you're engaging a couple of heavy tanks at long range. Just keep in mind that they are not the strengthiest of helicopter. They don't have that much armor, one on the front and one on the side. So if you retreat this guy, try to have him engage his nose towards the enemy. If you show him the back of the helicopter, it's going to really take some damage. It has 8 strength, and that means that it can take some AA fire, but not too much. So try not to expose it too much, because with exceptional optics you won't need to expose it that much to enemy fire. Now, because the Tiger Recon helicopter carries such a varied assortment of weapons, you'll need to be clever about taking these things down. And the ones, or the few things that they cannot really engage, are infantry. So AA infantry is the best way to go. They do of course have rocket pods, but so long as your infantry isn't spotted or that they engage the helicopter at a range greater than 2200 or 2100, they can safely take down the Tiger. Also, AA guns couldn't do the job. An AA gun firing at 2800 meter range will do the job. Just make sure that the Tiger doesn't quickly close the gap between the AA gun, so you, and itself, because then it will fire one of those hot 2s at you if it still has them, and at a 45% stabilizer they can actually hit your AA gun. So either ambush these guys or be very careful as you engage them. Next up, a cheap but still very sturdy and very effective recon unit is the Leopard 1A1. Good optics, medium size, so not that susceptible to HGMs. Good speed, good accuracy, and even a decent stabilizer on it, and 5 frontal armor. Now, they don't do anything particularly well, but for 30 points you get a very nice all-rounder unit. They can do scouting for you, they can engage some targets, just not any heavy tanks, because 12 frontal armor or 12 AP power is not going to fool anyone. 5 frontal armor is not going to be a lot of protection for this tank, and that means that you can take it out quite easily with anything that you use against tanks. ATGMs, main tank guns, autocannons on some of the IFVs which have AP power can do this thing. But for 30 points I do find it a notable unit because it does everything very, very decently. Of course, if it had very good optics it would be even better, but that thing would be borderline overpowered by that time. To counter them, as I mentioned, bring a medium to heavy tank gun, bring an autocannon or an ATGM. Helicopters also work very, very well against the Leopard 1A1, and this means that you can take out this tank pretty safely, pretty easily. Finally, as the notable unit for the recon, we got the Ferns, and these are the sniper teams, which gives them exceptional stealth, good speed, and a sniper rifle. Now, I rarely ever use the sniper rifle to actually engage any targets, because you're going to give your position away and you don't want that. They are a stealthy recon team, and this is how you should use them. Park them in a bush, have them spot the enemy from a position where normal recon infantry would not be very safe to go to, and really use and possibly abuse that exceptional stealth to go around enemy lines and try and spot command vehicles so that your artillery or your friend's artillery can then take it down. Because they're only a 2-man strength squad, they can be wiped out very, very easily using mortars, napalm, tanks, infantry, IFVs, pretty much anything. If you're using infantry, close that gap between you and the Ferns very quickly, because you don't want that sniper rifle firing at you too often. It can engage you at a much greater range than the machine guns or assault rifles from your infantry can. So if you engage these guys, make sure you bridge that gap and get within range of your own weapons. In the vehicle tab we got 2 vehicles. We got the Mortar VT-1 and the Wiesel 1 TOW 2. Let's start off with the Wiesel 1 TOW 2. On the one hand, this is a notable unit because it has a very good accuracy and very good AP power. It carries 10 of these TOW 2 missiles firing at a 26-25 meter range. But the problem is that it has 0 autonomy, or at least 200 kilometers is on the very, very low end of the scale. This makes it in a negative regard a notable unit because you have to constantly refuel these things. But once they actually get to their position, they can be quite devastating. So make sure that you have one of those fuel trucks available, you have a Mancati or a Jupiter to keep up with these guys. Otherwise they're going to be stranded somewhere halfway to their destination and you won't be able to use those very nice TOW2s. Of course the Jaguar also carries ATGMs, but this is just a standard TOW launcher and I don't find them that interesting. Taking out Wiesels is easy if you can take down their supply vehicle, because if they're stranded they're just sitting ducks for artillery. And one frontal armor, one side, one back and one top means that this thing is very susceptible to mortar fire or artillery fire. Bombs will do this thing in, and if you use infantry they cannot even engage that. So very easy to take these things down if you can get the right unit in place. If you're facing off against this thing with tanks, you're doing it wrong, because those TOW2s will easily wreck your tanks. Another interesting unit, a notable unit in this tab, is the Mortar VT-1. This thing has 1925 meter ground range. It has no range against helicopters or airplanes because it is just a basic tank destroyer. 15 AP power, 3 HE power, so it can engage both infantry and tanks, and IFVs and APCs. 4 frontal armor for a 25-point vehicle is not bad. Optics are not good, but you get this thing not for its optics but for the cheap carrying platform for the L7A3. It's just a Marder with the gun from, I think, one of the Leopards. Yeah, from the Leopard 1A2, 1A4 and 1A5. Except that with this thing you pay 60 points for it, and of course you get a bit better platform, and this is just the Marder carrying that gun. This means that you have a decent rate of fire, 6 rounds a minute, and they can very quickly earn those 25 points back in kills. Use the Mortar VT-1 to escort friendly troops. Escort, for example, a couple of other Marders once they're on destination or en route to their destination, to engage IFVs, APCs and infantry, to make sure your own infantry has time enough to make sure that they can get to their building and their destination. Taking down the Marder is not that difficult. It is still a standard Marder carrier, so don't expect this thing to take a lot of fire from tanks, infantry or helicopters before it dies, because it only has very low armor values. Helicopters, not really any interesting helicopters. You could say that this one is slightly interesting because it has a 45% stabilizer. That means that it can fly at full speed, 240 kph, fire a couple of those hot 2s and get out. But for me it's just a standard ATGM plane and I don't find them that interesting. The Germans also have a helicopter armed with stingers. These are very nice and can earn themselves back pretty quickly. But they are just a helicopter carrying AA, so you got plenty of those in the game. The last unit I wanted to discuss is one of the seed planes in the game, and that is the Tornado ECR. These things, like the Raven from the Americans, carry a long-range seed missile. 5.2 kilometer range, fire and forgets, of course, because you don't want to hang around waiting to see if this missile hits. 65% accuracy means that most times this thing will hit, and with a 20 AP power this will take out pretty much any of the AA units, except for some of the super heavy armored units. So if you were doing a blue on blue and for example you're firing at a Challenger marksman, you might not be able to take it down with one hit. You might need to fire 2 of them. Good ECM, 50%, good speed, 1000. They even have some AA missiles, the M9L. And that means that if you're in a pinch, if you don't have any air superiority fighters available, or if you're dealing with a couple of helicopters, they can actually help you out. To deal with these airplanes, pretty much the same strategy as I discussed in my other notable unit videos. Use a layered air defense where you have a couple of AA guns backed up with a couple of anti-air missile launchers. And if you see one of these things coming in, make sure you turn off all of your radar guided AA. So long as you don't give this thing any targets, nothing to fire at, it is not a threat, because it can only fire those missiles at the target if the radar is banging away. One special note about the Tornado ECR is that at this 5 km range it can even be used against ships, because ships also use a radar. It'll not kill the ship very quickly, but if you can get 4 of these missiles to hit and they do 20 AP power damage, you will do quite some damage against those ships. And for some reason the ships themselves cannot really defend against the AGM 88 because they somehow don't recognize it as a threat. They will sometimes pop flares, but they will not use any of their self-defense weapons to make sure that they down that missile. It's not something you see very often, but if you know how to use this trick, you know that you can use a seaplane as a makeshift anti-ship plane, and that actually gives the Tornado ECR a bit more application than just an anti-radar plane. So that's the interesting notable units for the Germans, the West Germans. If you think I missed any of the units, please let me know in the comments. And if you think I mispronounced any of these units' names, let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. I hope you liked the video. If you did, please give it a like. And if you want to see more of these videos, because I will be doing more of them the coming few weeks, just subscribe to my channel and I'll keep them coming. Thanks for watching and see you next video.